everyone. My name is Nilsson here at ILI, and today I am here to tell you about speaking part 3 of the IELTS exam, okay? Pat and Aaron have already talked about part 1 and part 2 of the speaking test, okay? So what is part 3 of the speaking, okay? So first, part 3 of the speaking is always related to part 2. The examiner will ask you 2, 3 questions, maybe 4. Next, in part 3 of the speaking, it's usually questions related to expressing an opinion, okay? So the examiner will ask you questions in which you have to present your point of view. You have to present, or you have to say what you think, and then very importantly, you also have to provide reasons, okay? Now, here is a little bit of a problem because many students answer the question, but they don't really provide any backup. So they give short answers, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, or even shorter sometimes. Now that is not good enough in part 3, okay? In part 3, your answers should be maybe around 30 to 45 seconds long. The time is not as important as giving a very solid answer, okay? Now, the whole part 3 lasts about 3 to 4 minutes, okay? So that is the general overview of part 3, all right? Now, when I'm teaching IELTS, I've been teaching IELTS for 9 years now, one of the most common questions I get asked is, what if I don't know anything about the topic? Generally, you don't need to be afraid of that, okay? In the IELTS, there are no questions that require you to have specialized knowledge, all right? As I said a while ago, you need to be able to express an opinion. You need to be able to show that you have an idea and that you can support your idea, okay? So you don't need to worry, or you don't need to be scared that they will ask you a question that you need to have specialized knowledge, okay? That doesn't happen in the IELTS, all right? Another important thing about the speaking part 3, and the same also for part 1 and part 2, but especially for part 3, you need to answer the question, okay? You cannot, for example, tell the examiner, I'm sorry, can you change the question? Or I am sorry, I don't know about this, so can I have another question? Yeah, that you cannot do that, okay? You still need to answer the question. Whatever question the examiner asks you, you still need to be able to say something about it, okay? I am now going to talk about 3 problems that are very common in part 3 of the speaking, okay? The first problem is, what do you do if you don't understand the question? Now, a minute ago I said that in the IELTS you don't need any specialized knowledge, okay? But sometimes the examiner will ask you a question that may sound very complicated, that may sound very complex, or there is 1 or 2 words in that question that you don't understand. Now, here, one mistake that students make is they still try to answer the question even though they didn't understand the question. So it's very difficult to get a good answer, okay? What can you do? Well, very simple. Ask the examiner again, okay? Many students are afraid that if they ask the examiner will think that their English is not good. Okay, don't think like that. That's not a problem. It's a speaking test, not a listening test, okay? And sometimes, even for native speakers, we ask the other person to repeat the question, or we say, I'm sorry? Okay, so it's not really a problem, all right? But the examiner will not repeat the question or will not explain anything unless you ask, okay? So if you didn't understand the question, very politely ask the examiner to repeat it. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understood the question. Could you repeat, please? I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please? All right. Another situation regarding the question is maybe you understand most of the question, but there is one word that you don't understand. Okay, so it is perfectly okay to ask the examiner what that word means, or to rephrase that word, or to explain it. Okay, so it's perfectly okay to do that. Okay. However, the examiner wants to see your ability to communicate in an English environment, okay? So, using this technique of asking the examiner to repeat every time, that is not a good idea either, because it breaks down fluency. It kind of hinders communication, all right? So, make sure you use it when it's necessary. Quick story, in the past I've had students asking me, so can I ask the examiner to repeat the question, and while the examiner repeats the question I can think of an answer. That is not a smart idea, okay? The examiner may be able to figure out that while he's repeating the question, you are already thinking of an answer, okay? And that is, again, not very good for communication, all right? So, remember, if you don't understand the question, ask the examiner to repeat it. Be polite, okay? Now, it's if anything, it shows that you have good ability to communicate, okay? Problem number 2, okay? Now, this is the next problem, in the sense that, okay, you understood the question, but as you think about the question, nothing comes to your head. Suddenly you find yourself in a situation where you have no idea, okay? Where you are not sure what to say, okay? Now, here, again, it's part of natural communication to maybe tell the examiner that you're struggling, all right? Even native speakers, sometimes somebody asks us a question and we cannot produce an answer immediately, okay? The examiners know that you are not robots. We are not robots, okay? And sometimes people ask us questions that leave us a little bit confused, all right? And we need a few seconds to gather our thoughts very quickly, and that's perfectly okay. So if you do understand the question, but you're not sure how to answer it, tell the examiner, okay? Tell, wow, that's a difficult question. I've never thought about that before. Oh, that's a difficult topic. I don't know much about it. If I had to guess, or in my opinion, or I think, okay? Tell the examiner that you are having difficulties, all the while you're thinking about what to say, okay? Now, telling the examiner that it's a difficult question and you're not sure how to answer doesn't mean that you don't have to answer the question, okay? You still have to answer the question. Now, we say those few phrases at the beginning so that we have a little bit of time to think about what we can say, okay? I've had situations in the past where people have come to do speaking practice tests, like a mock test, all right? So what we do is we have students come and meet a stranger, somebody they have never seen before, like in a real IELTS exam, and then we give them a full mock test. Now, I've had situations before where students did exactly that. They acknowledged, they recognized that we're struggling, and they said, that's a very difficult question and I'm not sure how to answer it, and then stopped there. At the end of the day, remember, you still need to answer the question, okay? To say, I am sorry, is not enough for you to get a good score, all right? Okay, here are some phrases that you can use, okay? And one of them is, you can say, wow, that's a difficult question. Let me think for a second. I'm not really sure how to answer that, okay? Or, that's a very interesting question. If I had to give an answer, I'd say that, okay, or some phrases like that. It's very difficult to know exactly. That's another good phrase that you can say, okay? However, make sure that when you use these kind of phrases, you use them in a very natural way, okay? Like I said earlier, the examiner wants to see that you can communicate naturally in an English speaking environment, okay? And we don't use these phrases every time somebody asks us a question. We don't always say, when somebody asks a question, that's an interesting question, let me think. No, we don't do that all the time, okay? We do it with some questions when we really need time to think. Aside from using the phrases or some of the phrases that I have just mentioned, there is also another thing that you can do if you need time to think of an answer. And that is to paraphrase the question, all right? What does it mean, paraphrase? Paraphrase means to say the same thing but in different words, okay? And one of the problems that I often see here is that many people just repeat the whole question, okay? So, for example, the examiner asks you, what are some important hobbies for children? And then you say, some important hobbies for children are. Now, there is nothing wrong with that, okay? But you are not showing the examiner that you can use different vocabulary, that you can say things in a different way. You're showing the examiner that you are very good at repeating, okay? Now, repeating doesn't mean that you are able to communicate, okay? So simply change a few words around, okay? So what are some leisure activities that are good for young children or for kids? Okay, I'm still saying the same thing, okay, but I'm using slightly different words. Now that is a very good thing to do if you want to increase your lexical resource score, okay? And now problem number 3, okay? And problem number 3 is related to content or time, all right? A lot of students answer the question and then they maybe give one short reason and then that's it, 10-15 seconds. Now again, there is nothing wrong with that, but part 3 of the IELTS speaking test is specially designed for you to present an idea and then give supporting points to prove your idea, to prove your point of view, okay? And that's why we should give more developed answers. Present your idea and then you can expand your answer. And like I said earlier, you should get to somewhere between maybe 30, 45 seconds or even 1 minute, as long as your answer is consistent, okay? What can you do to expand your answer? First, explain why, okay? Explain your answer. Give reasons to your answer. All right? If you think or if you say that, in my opinion, a great hobby for children is to play chess. Okay, that sounds like a very good answer. Okay? But if I am the examiner, I am also curious to know why you think that, okay? So you can say things like, oh, because playing chess helps children to develop their logical abilities and also to think ahead, to calculate 3-4 moves ahead, okay? So you can present many different reasons, okay? Number 2, give examples. It is always so much easier to understand something when you give an example, okay? Again, your answers, the more concrete, the more real your answers are, the more specific your answers are, the easier it is for the examiner to understand exactly what you're talking about, okay? And in this case, examples are extremely helpful, okay? Another way to expand your answers is by making concessions, okay? Now, what does it mean to make concessions? Basically, making concessions means that you admit that your opinion is not the entire truth. That means that other people, or maybe a lot of other people, may have a different opinion, okay? They may have an opinion that is actually opposite than what you think, okay? Here is an example. If the examiner asks you, do you think it is important to go overseas to study English well? Here is an answer that you could give. Well, personally, I don't think that it is important to go overseas, okay? I think that everybody can learn English in their own country, as long as they're dedicated, as long as they work hard. It is completely possible to learn English in your own country. I admit, however, that a lot of other people may think that going overseas is the best option because they have more possibilities to communicate using English, while in your own country we may not have that possibility, okay? So you see here, you basically talk about both sides of the story, and in that way you make your answer longer, you expand your answer, all right? Okay, so time to sum up a little bit. Okay, so first and foremost, do not be afraid, okay? Do not be afraid. The examiner is not going to ask you questions that you need special knowledge, okay? All the questions will be related to giving an opinion, giving an idea, or they will ask you questions about things that you probably know, okay? If you don't understand the question, ask the examiner, okay? Remember, it's a speaking test, not a listening test. If you do understand the question, but you are not sure what to say, you can admit that. You can say some phrases like, I'm not really sure, okay? So you have a little bit of time to think about what you want to say. And then remember to expand your answers, all right? Make your answers longer. How do you expand? Well, number one, you give reasons, you explain why, okay? Number two, you can give examples. Use an example to explain your answer, okay? And number three, you can make concessions, okay? Talk about both sides of the story, okay? What your opinion is about the topic, and then accept or admit that other people may think differently, okay? Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope that you have a great time, and I hope that these tips are helpful to you. If you have any questions, if you have any ideas, please write, okay? We will try to answer every question that we get, okay? And I hope that you have a fantastic day, all right? Thank you very much, and see you next time.